What's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. It's almost 7 p.m. where I'm at right now. Today is December 15th, 2025, and we are continuing our 17th book in our Book to React series. This is episode 9 of A History of Psychology from Antiquity to Modernity, written by the mysterious Islamophobic, very knowledgeable psychology professor Thomas Hardy Leahey. The reason we were reading this book to begin with was because I had an exam on the history of psychology. Took the exam today, probably passed it. So, I'll brush that off my shoulders. Another thing off the checklist. But we're still going to be finishing this book before the end of the year. This year, I've read more than I've read since I was 15. I probably, if you think about the books that I've read on live and also the books that we read off live, man, it's probably this tall, man. It's crazy the amount that we've been reading this year. And I'm very proud of that. That's one thing I can say that this is like the first year I've actually held a New Year's resolution, which is to read more. And next year's New Year's resolution is actually going to be the opposite. Less podcasts, less news, more music. Because I unplugged from the news and podcasts for like the past week and a half, and I actually felt pretty good. About it. But without further ado, we're going to be continuing by reading all of chapter 4 today, right here. The end of the pre-modern world from 1000 to 1600 CE. Shout out to my guy Kamal in the chat with the pound sign. Shout out to my comrade, always showing up and showing love in these live streams. If you have any books that you think we should read, put it in the comment section. And if you want to join a movie review with Acti and I, we're going to be doing one possibly this evening, inshallah. And so anybody is welcome to join. Just hit up my email. We will be reviewing Denzel Washington's 1995 film, Devil in a Blue Dress. So if you've seen it, let us know if you want to be a part so you could drop your 2 cents. Without further ado, we're going to be jumping into this text right here. And we are reacting to all comments as usual. So, from Antiquity to the Scientific Revolution, the Middle Ages, 1000 to 1350. Following the long economic depression of late antiquity, the economy and population began to recover around 1000, ushering in the High Middle Ages, which lasted until about 1350. The key economic development of this period was the appearance of the first cities and the technological creativity they embraced. Cities were important for a number of reasons, each of which made European life different and more dynamic than the shattered Greco-Roman past or static societies elsewhere, such as in Islam or China. I told you, Islamophobic. Cipolla says that the rise of European cities was the cities were autonomous, controlled by neither feudal lords nor the church. Medievals said, city air makes you free. The citizen of a city owed no feudal obligations, as even great lords did to their king, and they were not serfs. The city was thus rather like the American frontier, a place people went to find liberty and to pursue their own interest. Second, the citizens of the European cities were the first businessmen, thinking in terms of trade and profit, not arete, as in Greece. Greeks and Romans did not think in economic terms. The burghers of the cities did, beginning to develop modern business methods such as credit and companies. Finally, in pursuit of profit and productivity, city citizens embraced technology. The ancients had despised technology. They had all the slaves they needed to do hard work. There were no slaves in the cities, and so businessmen and artisans adopted and improved machines, building mills and looms and clocks. The embrace of technology led to the development of great sailing ships, the growth of trade, and openness to the rest of the world as potential trading partners. It also encouraged machine thinking, helping foster the idea that the world is a machine, an idea central to the scientific revolution. As with Anslim's faith-seeking reason, the development of cities, business, and technology was uniquely European. A small but telling example is clocks and watches. The Chinese relied on ancient water clocks until nearly modern times, and an 18th century French ambassador to Islamic Turkey described the puzzled wonder with which his local guides regarded his watch. The High Middle Ages were an enormously creative period in Western thought. Many Greek works, especially those of Aristotle, were recovered, and institutions critical to the development of modern science were created. The magnificent Romanesque and Gothic churches were constructed. Modern political forms started to develop, especially in England, with documents such as the Magna Carta limiting royal power. The recorded literary expression of individualism also increased greatly, with stereotypical dramatic and literary characters, such as mankind, developing into very human characters, such as Chaucer's Dame Alison and the Franklin. The Black Death, bubonic plague, dramatically marks the dividing line between the High and Late Middle Ages. The plague swept Europe, killing about a third of the population, engendering understandable fear and even panic. At the same time, conflict between secular and religious leaders intensified, and Luther's Reformation challenged the enormous authority of the Catholic Church. It was a turbulent period, but it did not lack creativity. Aristotle's science was developed and extended, and naturalistic investigations of nature began. The late Middle Ages faded into the Renaissance, when the literary works of the Greeks and Romans were recovered, in addition to the philosophical and scientific works that had been translated in the High Middle Ages. It was a period of creative destruction, during which the ossified structures of feudalism and church authority were torn down, making way for the creation of the modern way of life that began in the 17th century. Going here, the market town of Bruges in Belgium. Commerce-oriented cities such as Bruges were catalysts for economic recovery during the Middle Ages and incubators of science, technology, and the modern way of life. Looks like a cute little city. Should visit. I actually like Belgium. I know some people don't like Belgium, but Belgium was actually the first European country I ever got to walk around in, be a tourist in, and it was kind of cool. I liked Brussels. Brussels was cool. Anyway, continuing here. Medieval psychology in the academy. Scholastic psychology in the High Middle Ages. The High Middle Ages experienced an intellectual renaissance as the works of Aristotle and other Greek writers, accompanied by Muslim commentary, poured into the West through Spain, Sicily, and Constantinople, the places where Islam and Christianity intersected, sometimes peacefully, oftentimes not. Aristotle's philosophy was naturalistic and brought a fresh, unreligious approach to knowledge and human nature that was reconciled with Christian faith only with difficulty. St. Thomas Aquinas, who synthesized faith in God's word and reason as found in Aristotle's philosophy, only narrowly escaped a charge of heresy. This union of Christ and Aristotle, impressive though it was relatively sterile. The future belonged to those who, like William of Ockham, divorced faith from reason and pursued only the latter. Continuing to this part right here, box 4.1, pre-modernism. I know that pre-modernism sounds like an oxymoron. I said earlier that modernism was an analysis of the conditions of life in the modern world, offered by thinkers who noticed and reflected on the historical changes taking place around them. They knew that they were living in modern times because in their own experience, they could contrast it with pre-modern life. So how can there be an ideology of pre-modernism? In one sense, of course, there can't be. No one knew in Antiquity or the Middle Ages that their way of life wouldn't go on forever. In fact, they thought it would. Change was extremely rare and usually for the worse. A famine, a war, a bad king, even good times like bountiful harvests sowed the seeds of their own destruction and the Malthusian economy as people responded by having more children who ate the surplus, ensuring that mere subsistence returned. Go into the comments. Kamal says, good point. I don't know much beyond the waffles. Talking about Belgium. Anyway. On the other hand, a sort of ideology of life emerged in the Middle Ages, based on a fusion of the ideas of Plato, the Neoplatonist, and Aristotle, as filtered through Christian theology. It was an ideology based on the great chain of being. It said that the universe could be described as a sort of Aristotelian hierarchy of Platonic and earthly beings, like this, in a Neoplatonic form. The one, spiritual beings under the one, called angels by Christians, humans, a mixture of spirit, soul, and matter and body, under the spiritual beings, then animals, then plants, then inanimate matter, and then prima materia, Aristotle's pure potential matter. The medieval ideology of life then came from extending the hierarchy to the social world, in the medieval phrase, as above, so below. There's God, then the king, then aristocrats, then freemen, then serfs. From early on, the Catholic Church liked to see the hierarchy with Pope above king, though below God. But this was a dream of theirs, never a reality, though it did stoke conflict between the church and secular rulers. The idea was that life on earth ought to reflect the divine order of heaven. This fitted in very well with the unchanging nature of life in the Malthusian economy. Not only did things not change very much, but ideally they ought not change at all. Since most change was bad, change could be seen as departing from the ideal, static nature of the universe and people's position in the universe. Certainly the great change pleased kings, seeming to give them power to rule absolutely. Bishop J.B. Bossuet, born 1627 and died in 1704, King Louis IV of France's chief political spin master, wrote, "Royal authority is sacred. God established kings as his ministers and reigns through them. The royal throne is not the throne of a man, but the throne of God himself." Efforts by parliaments and people to rule themselves were more than treason. They were offenses against God and the metaphysical order of the universe. From our psychological perspective, the thing to note is that this pre-modern ideology of social life differed from both the Greek way that preceded it and the modern way that followed it. The Greeks, with their partial exception of Plato, built their notions of government on their conceptions of human nature. Aristotle, recall, said that because human beings have a nature, physicists, they should live in a society that permits and encourages human flourishing, eudaimonia. As you will see, while the philosophers of the Enlightenment disagreed with the Greeks and each other about what human nature was like, they nevertheless believed that society should be built on a right understanding, ultimately a scientific understanding of human nature. The pre-modern ideology of as above, so below did not so much reject human nature as ignore it. It's no surprise then that while psychological thought continued to develop in antiquity in the Middle Ages, it was not socially or politically important. Now continuing here on page 100, it's dry December. I have not had a drink all December. I have not been drinking since the beginning of December. And you know how it is. Whenever we do book react, we take a shot every 100 pages. So I'm taking a shot of clear Hungarian water. Quite heavy water it is. Continuing. In the 12th and 13th centuries, universities began to appear, usually linked to cathedrals, and theologian philosophers abounded. Two of the most important were Saint Bonaventure, born 1221 and died 1274, and Saint Thomas Aquinas, born 1225 and died in 1274. They stand respectively for the two great medieval approaches to knowledge, human nature and God, the Platonic Augustine mystical way and the Aristotelian Thomistic way of natural reason constrained by faith. Bonaventure was a great voice of Christian Neoplatonic philosophy. He took a sharply dualist Platonic view of soul and body, as had Augustine. To Bonaventure, the soul was much more than the Aristotelian form of the body. As Plato had taught, Bonaventure said the soul and body were two completely distinct substances, and the immortal soul was merely using the mortal body during its earthly existence. The essence of a person was the soul. The soul was capable of two sorts of knowledge. First, while united with the body, it acquired knowledge of the external world. Here, Bonaventure followed the empiricism of Aristotle by denying the existence of innate ideas and arguing that we build up universal concepts by abstraction from experienced individual objects. However, like Aquinas, but not Aristotle, Bonaventure asserted that abstraction alone is insufficient and must be joined to divine illumination from God to achieve true knowledge. The second source of knowledge, Bonaventure said, belonged to the soul alone, knowledge of the spiritual world, including God. The source of this knowledge was introspective meditation, which discovers the image of God illuminated in the soul, and apprehends God through interior reflection without recourse to sensation. We should emphasize again that Augustinian introspection did not have as its aim knowledge of a personal self as in psychotherapy, or of human nature as in scientific psychology. Its goal was to obtain knowledge of God. Bonaventure distinguished four mental faculties: the vegetative faculties, the sensitive faculties, the intellect, and the will. However, Bonaventure spoke of other aspects of the soul, which he refused to call faculties, but whose inclusion made his system resemble Ibn Sina's. For example, he distinguished a higher aspect and a lower aspect to the intellect, a distinction that resembles Ibn Sina's contemplative and practical intellects. As Aristotle became known in the West, many thinkers struggled to reconcile his scientific naturalism with the teachings of the Catholic Church. The greatest and most influential of these thinkers was St. Thomas Aquinas. He called Aristotle the philosopher, the thinker who demonstrated both the power and the limits of human reason, practiced without the word of God. Aquinas adopted Aristotle's system and showed that it was not incompatible with Christianity. To harmonize philosophy and theology, Aquinas distinguished sharply between them, limiting a person's reason to knowledge of the world of nature. Aquinas thus accepted Aristotle's empiricism and the consequence that reason can know only the world, not God. God can be known only by inference from his work in the world. Aquinas set out to consider all topics, including psychology, philosophically that is, independent of revelation, following Anselm's path of faith-seeking reason. In his psychology, he closely followed Aristotle, but he also gave weight to the opinions of Islamic writers, especially Ibn Sina. He made few original contributions to Aristotelian psychology, but refined and extended the classification of mental aspects given by the philosopher and his Islamic commentators. Figure 4.2 summarizes Aquinas' picture of mind. As can be seen, most of it is similar to ideas of Aristotle and Ibn Sina, and most of the new points are self-explanatory. Aquinas, more than Aristotle or his non-Christian commentators, was concerned to distinguish humans who have souls from animals who do not. This concern emerges clearly in his discussions of motivation and the faculty of estimation. Unlike Ibn Sina, Aquinas held that there are two kinds of estimation. First, there is estimation proper, which is characteristic of animals and not under voluntary control. The lamb must flee the wolf it sees to be dangerous. The cat must pounce on the mouse. The second kind of estimation is under rational control. Aquinas called it cogitava, and it is found only in humans. We may flee the wolf if it appears dangerous or choose to approach it, perhaps to take a picture of it. One's estimative power is under the control of one's free will, for one chooses and makes judgments instead of simply responding blindly to animal instincts. Just as there are two kinds of estimation, so there are two kinds of motivation or appetite. Sensitive animal appetite is a compelled, natural inclination to pursue pleasurable objects and avoid harmful ones, and to overcome obstacles to that pursuit. A human being, however, has intellectual appetite, or will, which has the power to seek higher moral goods under the guidance of reason. Animals know only pleasure or pain. Humans know right and wrong. Three other differences from the Ibn Sina Three other differences from Ibn Sina may be noted. First, Aquinas dropped compositive imagination as an unnecessary addition to retentive imagination and rational thinking. Second, by making cogitava, human estimation, a rationally guided faculty concerned with the outer world, the need for Ibn Sina's practical intellect vanished. Finally, Aquinas made the mind consistent with Christian theology by returning the active intellect to the human soul. Knowledge is an active product of human thinking, not a gift of divine illumination via the agent intellect. Despite some Neoplatonic remnants, such as the hierarchical organization of faculties, Aquinas' views stand in sharp contrast to Bonaventure's. Aquinas rejected the Platonic Augustinian tradition's radical dualism of soul and body. The body is not a tomb, a prison, or punishment, nor is it a puppet operated by the soul. A person is a whole, a mind and a body. Although the soul is transcendent, its natural place is in a body, which it fulfills and which fulfills it. This got Aquinas into trouble with Neoplatonized Christian orthodoxy, which looked to a disembodied life of bliss in heaven. Only by stressing the resurrection, when soul and body will be united forever, was Aquinas able to defend his Aristotelian philosophy, making it look like Tertullian's earlier treatment of mind and body. Aquinas' philosophy was a heroic attempt to reconcile science, Aristotle, with revelation. However, by conceptually separating the two, he was a harbinger of the future, when reason and revelation came into open conflict. Aquinas brought a fresh naturalism to the traditional Platonic Christian framework, but he accepted the framework and worked within it, as did all medieval natural philosophers and theologians. Going back up here, we're going to take a look at figure 4.2 briefly, Aquinas' conception of the mind. We have the rational soul, the locomotive and appetitive powers, the sensitive soul, and the vegetative soul. For the rational soul, we have cognition, also a part of it, intellectual appetite, which seeks universal good. In the rational soul, we have active intellect, which works on abstract universals, and passive intellect, which embodies the universals, right? Locomotive and appetitive powers, we have partially under it sensitive appetite, concupiscible, approaches or avoids sensed objects, irascible, resists barriers to goals. Okay. Then the interior senses under that, imagination, memory, estimation, common sense. Exterior senses, sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch. And the vegetative soul, nutrition, augmentation, and generation. All right, continuing here. Psychology in the late Middle Ages, rebirth or empiricism. Before the Black Death, some thinkers of the late Middle Ages were radically creative. We will briefly examine the most influential late medieval thinkers. William of Ockham, born 1287 and died in 1347, whose contribution was to revive empiricism, opening up for psychological analysis what had previously been reserved for metaphysics. Medieval philosophers conflated psychology and ontology, the study of the nature of being or existence. Following Plato, most medieval thinkers believed that something real must correspond to each mental concept. For Plato, that something real was the forms. For Aristotle, it was real existence. For Aristotle, it was real essences. For medievals, it was the ideas in the mind of God. For the Greeks and medievals, the only real knowledge was knowledge of universals. Indeed, it was asserted that the rational soul, or intellect, had knowledge only of universals, not of particular things. Following Aristotle, medievals held that the only certain knowledge was what could be deduced from universal propositions. This attitude persisted even in Aquinas. Although he described the process of abstraction as the way to universal knowledge, and although he held that the intellect knows only what is derived from the senses, he still maintained that the abstracted essences were metaphysically true, that they corresponded to holy ideas. Occam challenged this centuries-old assumption by substituting psychology for metaphysics. He asserted that knowledge begins with acts of intuitive cognition, direct, infallible acquaintance with some object in the world. Intuitive cognition does not yield mere opinion, as Plato held. It yields knowledge of what is true and false about the world. From such knowledge of things, it may go on to abstractive cognition of universals. But universals exist only as mental concepts. They have no existence outside the mind. These abstract concepts may either be true or false. For example, one may form the concept of a unicorn, which does not exist. Following Aristotle, Occam held that while intuitive cognition is infallible, abstractive cognition is not. Occam discarded the metaphysical problem that bedeviled Plato, Aristotle, and the medievals. How can each individual participate in a transcendent essence or form? He substituted the psychological question. How do we acquire universal concepts, given that we have direct knowledge only of individuals? His answer was that the mind notes similarities among objects, and based on the similarities, it classifies objects. Thus, universals are logical terms that apply to some objects and not others, terms that indicate relations among objects. Unlike Aquinas and other faculty psychologists, Occam denied the distinction of soul from its faculties. According to Occam, the soul does not have the faculty of will or intellect. Rather, what we call a faculty is simply a name for a certain kind of mental act. Will describes the soul in the act of willing. Intellect describes the soul in the act of thinking. Occam always sought to simplify accounts as much as possible, ridding them of non-essentials, which is why we speak of Occam's razor, although the idea is Aristotle's. Occam saw faculties as unnecessary reifications of mental acts into mental entities apart from the mind. Habit was crucial to Occam's view of the mind. For him, concepts were learned habits, ideas derived from experience. When he rejected the world of universals, whether Platonic forms or divine ideas, the status of universals was reduced to habit. These habits are what make possible the idea of a person's thinking independent of actually sensed objects. We cannot think about the forms, for they do not exist. We think instead about derived habitual concepts. Without them, we would be animals, reduced to simple responses to external stimuli. Occam drew a radical distinction, far more radical than Aquinas's, between faith and reason. Occam pointed out that there is no ground in experience or intuitive cognition for believing we have an immaterial, immortal soul. As far as reason or philosophy goes, the mind may be a perishable entity dependent on the body. It is only from faith that knowledge of the immortal soul comes. This separation of faith and reason greatly weakened theology and metaphysics, but it helped bring science into being. Most medieval philosophers believed, as did the Greeks, in the power of human reason to know eternal truth. They went further in asserting that God's truth and philosophical truth were one and could be synthesized, as in Aquinas' Summa Theologica. Some mystical clergymen, such as Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, who denied that philosophy could say anything about God, who is known through faith alone, rejected the idea. Despite the mystics, the general trend of thought before 1300 favored the Greek view. We saw this earlier in this chapter when we touched on the problem of universals. Most medievals held some form of realism, a belief that universal human concepts correspond to some enduring form or essence, conceived by medievals as an idea in the mind of God. This view was held by Plato, Aristotle, and Aquinas, despite their own differences. A few thinkers, called nominalists, maintained that universals were mere puffs of air emitted when we speak names, hence nominalism. They have no transcendent reality, being nothing more than verbal behaviors. Analysis of the problem of universal human knowledge led 14th century philosophers to put severe limits on what humans may know. The first step was taken by Peter Abelard, born 1079 and died 1142. the greatest medieval philosopher before the Middle Ages, when Aristotle's works were recovered. Like Aristotle, Abelard saw the difficulty with the metaphysical realist approach. According to realists, to say Socrates is a man is to relate two things: the living individual Socrates and the heavenly form of man. Abelard saw that man should be considered a label, or better, a concept that we apply to some individual. Man is a mental concept applied to Socrates, not a separate thing or transcendent form. For Abelard, concepts were purely mental images or labels. And when we discuss universals, we are discussing these mental entities, not eternal forms. Abelard's account of universals was thus logical and psychological rather than metaphysical. This position, best called conceptualism, was a forerunner to Occam's views, discussed earlier. In the High Middle Ages, it was thought that human knowledge and holy truth were coordinate, that human universals corresponded to the divine ideas. Abelard and Occam destroyed this self-confidence. They posed new questions about the basis of human knowledge. If universals do not reflect the divine ideas, and if they rest on knowledge of individuals, how do we justify our knowledge and show its truth? Before Abelard and Occam, the humans could achieve transcendent knowledge was taken for granted. After them, skepticism became an option again. Perhaps all human belief was mere opinion. Philosophers had to show how knowledge and opinion should be distinguished without reference to God or forms. Interestingly, belief in God's omnipotence forced a skeptical attitude on 14th century philosophers. Christians believe that God is omnipotent, capable of doing anything that is not self-contradictory. Therefore, if you are looking at a tree, God could destroy the tree, but maintain in you the experience of the non-existent object. If this is so, Christian thinkers had to ask how we can be certain of any perception, or of any piece of putative knowledge. How can we be sure of any piece of putative knowledge? This problem fostered a thoroughgoing critique of human knowledge by 14th century philosophers. The most interesting among them was Nicholas of Autrecourt, born 1300, a follower of Occam. Like Occam, he did not see psychology as metaphysics, saying that there are only acts of understanding and volition, not separate faculties of understanding and will. Like later empiricists, Autrecourt argued that certain knowledge lies in staying as close to appearances as possible. All we can know is what our senses tell us. So knowledge is grounded in experience, and the best knowledge is that which remains closest to experience. Autrecourt believed that making a leap from sense perception to forms, essences, or divine ideas was illegitimate. Nicholas of Autrecourt rejected the possibility of divine intervention to maintain an illusion of perception, and he based knowledge on an assumption shared with Occam. Whatever appears is true. This belief is necessary to an empiricist theory of knowledge, and Occam held it implicitly. By making it explicit, Autrecourt had to ask whether it is justified. Anticipating Berkeley's treatment of vision and American pragmatism, he concluded that we cannot be certain of this assumption, but can only hold that it is probably true because it seems more likely than the contrary assumption that whatever appears is false. Autrecourt and others worked out the complications of Occam's psychological account of universals by close analysis of the grounds of human knowledge. The search for a justification of human knowledge of the external world has continued ever since and is a root problem of modern cognitive science. In addition to fostering skepticism, Occam's thoroughgoing empiricism had another consequence. By excluding things of faith from the sphere of observation and reason, empiricism directed human eyes toward observation of the world that could be known, the physical world. Continuing on to rise of the concept of the individual. The individual in popular psychology, The modern concept of the individual began to emerge in many areas during the High Middle Ages. Biographies and autobiographies were written. Portraits came to reflect the individual, not merely the person's status. The development of transparent glass led to the creation of good mirrors. For the first time, people could see themselves clearly, and surely this led to self-reflection on the differences or the difference between the way they seemed to be to others and the way they felt and thought inside. Soon, Descartes would turn self-reflection into a new foundation for philosophy, and along the way, invent psychology. Most important of all was literature. In early Christianity, women were full participants in religion. They preached and often lived in chaste and mixed-sexed monasteries. In early Christianity, women were full participants in religion. They preached and often lived in chaste, mixed-sex monasteries. The early Middle Ages were full of strong female figures, as capable and powerful as any man. However, as Christianity absorbed classical culture, it absorbed Roman misogyny and Platonic aversion to sensual pleasure. Marriage was forbidden to priests. Women were forbidden to preach or even approach holy relics. They were reduced to second-class status as helpers of men. According to St. Thomas Aquinas, woman was created to be man's helpmate, but her unique role is in conception, since for other purposes men would be better assisted by other men. One special strong source of Christian misogyny was Saint Jerome, born 340 and died in 420, a Neoplatonist who linked womanhood to the temptation of the flesh. Medieval Christianity looked on sex as sinful, whether inside marriage or out. St. Jerome said, "In view of the purity of Christ's body, all sexual intercourse is unclean." Virginity was exalted. The Immaculate Virgin Mary was contrasted with Eve, the temptress. As the oppression of women grew, the cult of the Virgin spread throughout the Middle Ages and well into modern times, as is evident from the number of churches and schools carrying some variation of the name Notre Dame. This focus created an ambivalent attitude toward women. Women at their best were seen as holy vessels of God, yet men feared women as sources of temptation. A powerful and important response to the oppression of women was the clerical and courtly invention of the literature of fin amour, an artistic and philosophical embroidering of the experience of being madly in love, shared by many people in all societies. The literature of this courtly love, as it was renamed by a 19th century librarian, focused on individual feeling and thus helped construct the idea of people as distinct individuals to be valued in their own right. Moreover, it helped create a new conception of individuals as having within them, not in external lectures from virtue and vice, the causes of their own behavior. People all over the world get struck blind by Cupid's arrows and by lust. Sex was the major topic of many folk tales, bawdy stories, and tales called fabulo. It was also the main topic of the Galliards, student poets and singers of the High Middle Ages. The most famous collection of their songs is the Carmina Burana, which often presents a blasphemous glorification of the pagan goddess of love, Venus, Cupid's mother. She is described in terms such as rose of the world, usually reserved for the Virgin Mary. The rose, incidentally, was widely used as a symbol of both the vagina and the Virgin. The themes of fin amour, or courtly love, was developed by a number of medieval authors. Most were clerics from the French provinces of Aquitaine and Champagne, but some were women, most notably Marie of France, probably an abbess in an English nunnery. In these stories, literature elaborated the idea of romantic sexual love and integrated it into the emerging idea of knightly honor. According to the ideals of courtly love, knights dedicated themselves to the love of one lady, for whom they promised great deeds, and from whom they hoped for great love. These songs and tales of Fenimore, when not written by clerics with a moral in mind, were often written by minstrels with immoral hopes. Like many knights, the minstrels were men of too lowly origin to have any great hopes of getting their ladies into bed. In fear of these ladies' owners, husbands, fathers, or brothers, they sometimes confusingly for late readers addressed their missives to their lord. Such a term of address did, however, place aristocratic ladies in an uncommonly commanding position. On the other hand, aristocratic men could use it to their advantage. "Sir, I cannot have an affair with you. You are my husband's liege lord. I am but your servant." That's funny. "I'll make you my wife. Then your social rank will not count." That's funny. That's trolling. Thus, while Fenimore sometimes made men appreciate and even worship women, it did not always work to their advantage, and did nothing to change their official status as chattels of their husbands. In the vast majority of human societies throughout history, love very rarely formed the basis of marriage. In most cultures, the relationship has been created by arrangement between the families of the husband and wife, with varying degrees of consultation with the involved parties. Unsurprisingly, adultery tends to be common, and adulterous hopes provided the basis of Fenimore literature. Still, romantic love remains an important element in popular consciousness and psychology. During the High Middle Ages, signs of individuality. I skipped something. Unsurprisingly, adultery tends to be common, and adulterous hopes provided the basis of Fenimore literature. Still, romantic love remains an important element in popular consciousness and psychology. Theories of motivation must reckon with romantic love, or as Tenov has called it, limerence. During the High Middle Ages, signs of individuality among at least the upper classes and the urban merchants became more evident. In France and Norman England, the old Celtic legends were adopted by the upper class, adapted largely by French clerics, still trying to convert the pagans by recasting their tales. The Arthurian Fenimore romances were not overloaded with plausible individual characters. These scraps of misunderstood paganism reworked to make Christian tales, developed such characters by copying the how-to dialogues known from the Ars Amatoria, Art of Love, by the pagan Roman author Ovid, who lived in the time of Augustus. Ovid, rather tongue-in-cheek, pretended to tell aristocrats what they already knew, how to seduce and give in to seduction. This was the best, or only, model of even stereotypical love-making available for these clerics. Lancelot and Genevieve learned their cheating ways from Ovid, as did Tristan and Isolde. Ultimately, the spreading belief in romantic love, combined with the prosperity to act on it, tended to undermine the corporate nature of medieval society by making the basis of relationships personal feeling rather than appointed status. Gottfried von Strasbourg, in his Tristan and Isolde, one of the most enduring romantic love stories, wrote about the lovers' idyllic union in the forest this way: "Man was there with woman, woman there with man. What else should they be needing?" Church, state, and society are dispensed with in favor of the romantic, spiritual, and carnal union of two individuals. Aw, lovely. Continuing here, the individual and academic psychology. In two areas, individualism did make its way into medieval academic culture, ethics, and mystic religion, and even here the movement began in popular culture. Before the 12th century, sin was acknowledged but not felt as something personal. Penance was a mechanical procedure for expiating sin. In the 12th century, however, people began to weigh personal intention in judging transgressions. This attitude was formalized in Peter Abelard's voluntaristic ethics. Abelard held, contrary to other thinkers, that sin was entirely a matter of intention, not of action. An act is not right or wrong. What is right or wrong is the intention behind the act. Intentions are, of course, intensely personal, so Abelard's ethics were part of the growth of the individual. The medieval Catholic confessional, in which sinners recount their individual sins to a forgiving confessor, was a practical form of psychotherapy. Mysticism began in popular religion rather than scholastic theology. Not content with the mediation of a priest between self and God, mysticism seeks a direct connection between the two. The way to God is contemplation, not ritual. St. Francis of Assisi, born 1182 and died in 1226, the greatest medieval popular preacher, abandoned wealth and status in favor of communing with God through nature. St. Francis's teaching was individualistic and was perceived correctly as subversive by the Catholic Church. He narrowly escaped persecution as a heretic instead of canonization as a saint. Poverty was not an ideal that a rich and worldly church wished to support, and solitary contemplation threatened the complex of rituals that the church claimed brought salvation. Only by absorbing St. Francis and his followers could the church avert the threat of the rising consciousness of the individual inherent in mysticism. Thus, the idea of the individual, which would grow to great prominence in the Renaissance, was born in medieval popular culture. This ascetic ideal is a common one in world religions. Buddha and his early followers sought release, samsara, from the cycle of life through meditation and asceticism. Hindu followers of Shiva have long been austere gurus, forest sages living away from society and its temptations. Early Christian hermits living in the desert were the first monks. Just as some Druids had been forest sages, so too Celtic Christians, hermits, lived in remote forest areas or on small bleak islands. These forest sages, Christianized by St. Francis of Assisi, were found scattered throughout the courtly romances of the High Middle Ages too, hinting at a tie to the Albigensians of southern France. Ascetic religions focus inward for enlightenment or salvation, and psychology in the 17th century will be associated with English Puritanism and psychology in the 17th century will be associated with English Puritanism and Counter-Reformation Catholicism. Descartes will create psychology by withdrawing from society to a lonely, stove-heated room where he will discover consciousness and prove the existence of God from the prior existence of himself as a thinking thing. Witchcraft, rooted in European paganism, offered an alternative to Christianity, which had been painted over but not vanquished by early and medieval Christianity. Witches, female and male, were believed to be real people by the church and laity. How many such unconverted or semi-converted pagans really existed, we cannot tell, though there must have been some. Eventually, the clerical conception of witches who officially sold their souls to the devil and flew to Sabbaths seems to have caught on with the powerless. Witch-finding persecutors defined demon possession and witchcraft in such detail that they created a social role attracted to oppressed women and servants of the wealthy. While being a witch or the victim of a demon was socially undesirable, it nevertheless made one a center of attention and perhaps an object of fear. Going on here to the Renaissance from 1350 to 1600. We start with some poetry from Shakespeare. What a piece of work is man, how noble in reason, how infinite in faculty. In form and moving, how express and admirable. In action, how like an angel. In apprehension, how like a god. The beauty of the world, the paragon of animals. The GOAT. Jehu? What's a Nas? I'm joking. The Renaissance is rightly celebrated for its creativity in the arts. For the history of psychology, it initiated the transition from medieval to modern times. The distinctive developments of the Renaissance was the appearance or reappearance of humanism, placing importance on individual human beings and their lives in this world as opposed to the medieval concern with feudal social status and the religious concerns with future lives in heaven or hell. As psychology is the science of the individual mind and behavior, it owes a debt to humanism. All right. This is interesting, man. This is very deep philosophy, but I'm going to keep it real. One of the parts of history I don't like is essentially basically when the Western world became Christianized. I always found that part so boring. Like when, what was his name? Constantine. When Constantine converted and made all of Rome basically the first Christian nation, or the first white European Christian nation, because Ethiopia was Christian, Armenia was Christian, right? But when Rome became Christian, like, history just becomes boring. And it's like, this part of the movie sucks, right? And so while Augustine, Aquinas, Anselm, all of them have contributed to philosophy and theology, ontology, phenomenology, etc., I find this part just so not interesting. But I was very fascinated by the Platonic worldview, the Aristotelian worldview, the Socratic worldview. Even though I disagree with them, I real nerd shit, I cannot stop thinking about Neoplatonism and how cool it would be if we brought back Neoplatonism to some degree. Like, I feel like if we had another option outside of the Abrahamic faiths to resort to as the basis for understanding our spiritual lives, because I do believe in the spirit and I think the soul is real, right? But if we had another way of the soul to express itself or to understand the soul or conceptualize the soul other than the Abrahamic faiths, I truly believe we would have a much better world. But then again, young white folks in California have been following Buddhism and Hinduism for the past 50 years, and all we've gotten out of that is cults, Google, and Apple. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we don't need new religions. But I'm going to continue here. The ancients and the moderns, the revival of humanism. Although the Renaissance helped give birth to modern secular life, it began, as in the works of Francesco Petrarch, born 1304 and 1374, by looking backward rather than forward. Renaissance writers derided the Middle Ages as dark and irrational and praised the classical Greeks as enlightened and full of wisdom. The party of the ancients believed that people could do no more than imitate the glories of Greece and Rome. Right through the 18th century, the Enlightenment and Age of Reason, the influence of the ancients lingered as artists, architects, and political leaders looked to the classical past for models of taste, style, and sound government. Although most Renaissance thinkers were members of the party of the ancients, their efforts to translate ancient works helped break Aristotle's grip on natural philosophy. Medieval thinkers knew only Aristotle's accounts of the universe, but Renaissance scholars recovered alternative Greek accounts, most importantly the Stoics and the atomists. These rival views helped the party of the moderns, the makers of the scientific revolution, think about scientific problems in fresh ways. Renaissance humanism turned the focus of human inquiry away from medieval preoccupations with God and heaven toward the study of nature, including human nature. Freed from medieval religious prohibitions on dissection of the human body, artists such as Leonardo da Vinci, born in 1452 and died in 1519, and physicians such as Andreas Vesalius, born 1514 and died 1564, undertook detailed anatomical studies, beginning to see the body as an intricate but understandable machine, a key to scientific psychology. Since the dawn of time, people had closely observed nature but had rarely interfered in its operations. In the Renaissance, however, a new relationship between humans and nature took shape. Led by Francis Bacon, born 1561 and died in 1626, scientists began to interrogate nature by means of experimentation and sought to use their knowledge to control nature. Bacon said, "Knowledge is power." Don't you hate when racists create the slogans that you see in your 4th grade English class? Knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. I grew up hearing that. Knowledge is power. Meanwhile, it was made by Francis Bacon. I know Mr. Leahey is not going to talk about Mr. Bacon's racism, but I hope it's casually mentioned at least. Anyway, Bacon said, "Knowledge is power." Throughout the 20th century, psychology has followed Bacon's maxim, aiming to be a means of advancing human welfare. Applied psychology began with the Italian political writer Niccolò Machiavelli, born 1469, died 1527, and was resurrected as Machiavelli, who said, "Come with me, Hail Mary, run quick, see, what do we have here now?" Anyway, Niccolò Machiavelli, who linked the study of human nature to the pursuit of political power. Though not discarding religious notions of right and wrong, Machiavelli looked unsparingly at human nature in the new naturalistic spirit, seeing humans as made more for sin than for salvation. He told princes how to exploit human nature for their own ends while avoiding tempting paths of selfishness that could harm their nations. I never thought about it like that. Like, Machiavelli was a part of a larger movement, like the beginning of naturalism, the idea that humans have a natural sort of way of being. Our natural predilection is to be greedy, conniving, lying, deceiving, power hungry, you know what I mean, maniacal. I mean, that was a part of the naturalistic worldview. I never thought about it like that. And that's a different way of looking at the prince, I guess. Anyway, Renaissance naturalism. Out of the Renaissance interest in understanding nature came a point of view halfway between religion and modern science. Renaissance naturalism. Magnets are mysterious. How does this special lump of metal attract and repel others? Traditional explanations cited the supernatural. The magnet is inhabited by a demon or is under the spell of a sorcerer. Renaissance naturalism, however, attributed the magnet's power to a secret virtue inbred by nature and not by any conjuration. The magnet's power lay in the inherent nature of magnets, not in a demon or spell imposed on nature from without. Rejecting supernatural explanation represented a step towards science, but without an explanation of how magnetism worked. Secret virtues remained as mysterious as demons. Renaissance naturalism was accompanied by the idea of natural magic, which meant a sort of magic that controlled or changed nature without invoking supernatural powers. An example is discovering that food kept in a tightly sealed container would keep longer than food left lying around. It is magic only in the sense that human intervention altered the natural course of decay. Natural magic was the basis of the experimental sciences. Natural magic. This is insane. Like the fact that the Egyptians had built the pyramids at this time. And Europeans were just now rationalizing the idea. Like, yo, if I leave food out and it doesn't go bad because I covered it, this is a sort of natural magic. They had to, come on, man. Like the fact that we have to tell the story of Western civilization and act like all this is normal. Act like within the last 500 years, the Europeans discovering basic shit. Basic concepts. We have to act like this is normal. This is infuriating. This is like somebody pissing on you in your mouth and telling you that they're putting water on your tongue. You get what I'm saying? This is insane. But I'm going to continue here. Woosah. Greater mysteries than magnetism, however, are life and mind. Why do living things move, but not stones? How do we perceive and think? Religion said a soul dwelled in bodies, making them alive and giving them experience and the capacity for action. In Greek, psyche meant breath of life. Renaissance naturalism suggested that perhaps life and mind, like magnetism, were outcomes of natural powers possessed by living bodies, not infusions into nature from the soul. With regard to the mind, Renaissance naturalism suffered from two drawbacks. As in the case of magnetism, it lacked any explanation of how the body caused mental activity. More disquieting was naturalism's implication that humans have no souls, so that our personalities will perish with our bodies. To a larger degree, scientific psychology was created as scientists, beginning with Descartes, wrestled with these questions. Psychology seeks to give detailed explanations of mind and behavior without invoking a supernatural soul. The Renaissance party of the ancients, which looked to the classical past as the source of all wisdom, was challenged by the party of the moderns, which asserted that modern men and women were equal to the creative giants of the past. They proved they were right with the scientific revolution. Continuing here, popular psychology in the Renaissance, the mind within. The change from an external conception of mind to a more internal and individualistic one began first in the highly individualistic Italian city-states of the High Middle Ages, which in turn gave rise to the Renaissance. The most important city-state in this connection was Florence, which produced both Machiavelli and Dante. Dante Alighieri, born in 1265 and died in 1321. Dante's Divine Comedy, published circa 1314 and then, I guess, republished in 1915, or I don't know. The allegorical tale of his imaginary trip through hell, purgatory, and heaven neatly stands at the middle of the stereotype character divide in our psychological history of literature. So does the imaginary nature of his trip. It may have been as mentally real to him as the vices of the morality plays were to their audiences. By using real, well-known people of his time as the personification of sins in hell, the inferno, he achieves a unique realistic allegory. These people were widely known for their major vices: notorious gluttons, spendthrifts, misers, murderers, and traitors. They had in their lives been so notorious for their besetting sins that Dante uses them as personifications in his allegory. Dante's hell is arranged on Aristotelian lines, in strict compliance with the Orthodox Catholic view of sin. Sins of the flesh are the least sinful, easily erased by penitence and penances. Those who die unrepentant, however, go to the upper levels of hell, even though their sins are fairly minor. God created people who had to eat, after all, and ordered them to go forth and multiply. That is, have babies by sexual means. Having made eating and sex pleasurable, God made these sins of the flesh easy to work off. Consciously chosen sins, however, are far worse. Choosing to commit perjury, the ultimate sin, taking the Lord's name in vain, or choosing to betray your earthly Lord, or worst of all, your heavenly Lord, are much worse sins. Some of the sins denounced by Dante in the Middle Ages will strike modern readers as scarcely sinful. Usury, for instance, makes no sense as a sin in a country full of mortgages, car loans, and credit cards. To the medieval church, however, it was a highly unnatural act of making inert matter, gold or silver, breed. Loaning money was acceptable unless you charged interest. Since Jews did not consider usury a sin, this provided many job openings for Jews, and much hatred and resentment. While Finamore had its partisans, Dante provided a case study of its perils in the story of Francesca and Paolo, who, because of love, are eternally condemned to swirl around in the winds of lust, in the second circle of hell. Francesca was married off for political reasons to a deformed prince, but fell in love with his handsome younger brother, Paolo, and he with her. While reading a Finamore manuscript, Paolo and Francesca were caught killing them then and there, which was perfectly legal. Had they lived, as a few literary Fenimore couples did, and truly repented of their sins and retired to a monastery and convent, they could have been saved. Instead, they died in their sins, still believing in Fenimore, the love that so soon takes hold in the gentle breast. Therefore, they wound up in the circle of lust. The prince will wind up much farther down in hell's inverted scale of nature, in the river of boiling blood, while they, believers in genteel romantic love, are only sent to hell's outskirts. The aristocrat, who was Dante's host and patron while he was finishing the Divine Comedy in his old age, was a relative of Francesca and presumably not displeased with Dante's placement of her in hell. In the story, Dante, personifying a sinful pilgrim seeking God's love, faints out of sorrow at the lover's plight, showing that he, too, has a gentle heart. Those who say Dante populated his hell with his enemies are only partially correct. Francesca was not the only friend he found in hell. Farther down, in the lowest circle of upper hell, Dante woefully encounters his old mentor, Brunetto Latini, a neighbor who taught him much about the classics, poetry, and politics. They had both been banished when the other party came to power in Florence. Dante would have embraced his old friend, but his guide, Virgil, forbids it. Dante admits that he did not really want to share his friend's suffering. Brunetto was a sodomite, a homosexual, and he, along with others who had sex that could not possibly lead to reproduction, is running on burning sand under a rain of fire, symbols of sterility. The usurers are seated here too. Just as metals should not be able to breed, so too those who are equipped to breed should do so. They are two sides of the same coin, unnatural, perverse forms of breeding. Like the sin of usury, the proper medieval placement of homosexuals in hell will strike many modern readers as strange, even horrible. I still think that's a minority. As unfortunately, in 2025, America, a minority. Anyway, Dante, however, was certainly not homophobic. He had known what his dear friend's sexual orientation had been all along. All Florence knew, and Brunetto had been a well-respected man of learning and trusted with high political office until his party lost. But in Dante's hell, he illustrates the reason that he had died unrepentant of his besetting sin, and therefore represents it. He was interested during his life only in his earthly reputation, not his soul, and asked Dante only to keep the memory of his poems alive. Dante writes, "I answered him, might I have had my will, believe me, you'd not have yet been thrust apart from human life. For I keep within me still, stamped on my mind, and now stabbing my heart, the dear, benign, paternal image of you. You, living, you hourly teaching me the art of poetry, by which men grow immortal. Know this too. I am so grateful that while I breathe air, my tongue shall speak the thanks which are your due." Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful poetry. Writing to your gay friend in hell. Writing to your gay friend in hell. I'll always remember our good times, bro. You were my dog, Blue. Okay, I'm sorry. Let's continue here. Brunetto's request that his fame be kept alive on earth was a throwback to the ethics of the Greek Bronze Age and shows why he is stuck in hell. Having never had any regard for his immortal soul, he could not repent and evidently did not choose monastic chastity. By choosing to live and die in his sin, he sent himself to hell. As Francesca still cannot see that she should have pursued divine love, agape or charitas, so Brunetto still cares only about his fame on earth, and however horribly painful his situation, does not repent his choice to abandon holy chastity. Francesca and Brunetto's inability to see their choices as wrong is what has trapped them in their sins. And their being so entrapped is why Dante uses them to personify those sins in his allegory. The power of Dante's art is such that his characters transcend the stereotyping of the morality plays. But the Divine Comedy never quite left the world of allegory for that of real individual characters. Going back up here, we're going to go to box 4.2, the first modernist. It is, okay. Is it be better? I'm just going to read it in logical English. Is it better for a prince to be loved than feared, or feared than loved? It may be answered that one should wish to be both, but because it is difficult to unite them in one person, it is much safer to be feared than loved. When of the two, either must be dispensed with, because this is to be asserted in general of men, that they are ungrateful, fickle, false, cowardly, covetous, and as long as you succeed, they are yours entirely. They will offer you their blood, property, life, and children, as is said above, when the need is far distant. But when it approaches, they turn against you. I mean, that's deep. I mean, that's some gangster ethics, like, on the real. Like, people say they love you. Niggas will say, like, bro, I'll die for you. You my dog, for real, for real. You know what I mean? Ride or die. But when it's time to ride, they know where to be found. But it's better to be feared than loved because, like, you know, at least that gives you a sense of protection. And at least you know where people stand instead of all this fake love. You know what I'm saying? But I don't know. I'm going to continue here. Thus wrote Machiavelli in The Prince. As the text notes, Machiavelli can lay claim to being the first social psychologist. He looks at human nature without moral or religious lenses and gives practical advice, not moral lectures, to would-be rulers. This was why his contemporaries found him shocking. Traditionally, political philosophy was based on what a prince should do if he wished to be a good person leading a good state. Even Bossuet, while upholding royal absolutism, said the king was responsible to the moral judgment of God. Parliaments and peoples could not judge the king, but God could and would. Machiavelli's advice, on the other hand, is meant to make a prince effective, not moral. As he also wrote, if everything is considered carefully, it will be found that something which looks like virtue, if followed, would be his ruin, while something else which looks like vice, yet followed, brings him security and prosperity. Some commentators found Machiavelli's ideas so shocking that they thought he did not mean them, taking The Prince to be a satire, a display of what bad rule would look like. The word Machiavellian has entered the modern lexicon. There's even a Machiavellian personality test. So one might think that Machiavelli is the first modernist, proposing a proto-scientific basis for social understanding and political rule. But Machiavelli is better regarded as a reactionary. His conception of human nature, society, and politics was uneven anti-religious, but it was pre-religious, pagan, rather than post-religious, modern. His view of the state was that of the Greeks and Romans, a place wherein powerful men naturally vied for political power, and for whom the measure was success, both for themselves as politicians and the state that they led. They were not trying to live up to godly ideal. A good example was Julius Caesar. He was condemned by some fellow Romans as a tyrant and thus assassinated, but he worked hard for the interest of Rome as a military commander and civil leader. Even at the theater, he read documents and had runners coming and going, to the consternation of the rest of the audience. Machiavelli has often been admired by moderns, including the first one, but he was not a modernist. Very interesting right there. But I'm going to go here to Geoffrey Chaucer. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we're going to go to Geoffrey Chaucer. And then I believe, is that the end of the chapter? I thought this was only a short chapter. I guess not. I thought we stopped at 112. Okay, so yeah, all right. So we're a few pages away from the end of part 2. So we're gonna keep on reading till the end of part 2, which is about four pages or so, 4 or 5 pages or so. So let's get to it, baby. All right, let's go. Geoffrey Chaucer, born 1343 and died in 1400. The great 14th century English poet Chaucer created the first individualized realistic characters in English. Chaucer was a vintner's son, raised among the Anglo-French merchants of the wine trade in London. He had one uncle wealthy enough to buy land and live like a landed gentleman, without actually counting as a gentleman, because he had neither title nor the right to bear arms, nor to hunt. Due to young Geoffrey's proficiency in French and Italian and his Latin education at the London Grammar School, where he would have read Dante, his father was able to get him a post as a squire to a noble of fairly high rank. Eventually, he worked his way up to becoming the first poet laureate under King Richard II. He began to write the Canterbury Tales around 1386, reading them out loud to entertain the royal court. In the Canterbury Tales, Chaucer has representative, but sometimes highly realistic, members of most levels of society tell a tale to pass the time on their journey. They are on a package tour-style pilgrimage to the new and fashionable shrine at Canterbury Cathedral, though not for overwhelmingly religious reasons. Many of the stories and the banter in between concern sex, love, and marriage. Probably the most memorable and highly individual character is Dame Alison, the wife of Bath, a town in England. The wife of Bath had been very much a wife, widowed 5 times, and is now wealthy enough by inheritances to be on a pilgrimage. Her reason for traveling is to look for a handsome, young, sexy, and obedient 6th husband, a boy toy for the sexually liberated 14th century woman. She had thought she had found the perfect husband of this kind in her 5th, but he took to beating her. She is as sumptuously dressed as was allowed by these sumptuary laws, government regulations defining which people could wear particular kinds of clothing. She has been as upwardly mobile as allowed within her rank, her place in the Neoplatonic, God-given order of society. Her parents got her a start in life by marrying her off at the age of 12, not unusual in the 14th century, to an old prosperous landowner. Chaucer makes her sufficiently unattractive in both person and manner that the nobles hearing her tale could laugh at her and therefore stand to listen to her. The story she tells was set in the times of King Arthur and his queen Guinevere, when fairies rather than Franciscan friars roamed the land. It is a highly personalized version of the tale type known to historians as the loathly or loathsome damsel, a female version of the more familiar Frog Prince story. The basic narrative line of this story is that Guinevere, King Arthur's queen, sends a knightly hero on an unusual quest for unromantic reasons. He has raped a maiden who happened to catch his eye, which, as Alison informs her fellow pilgrims and Chaucer reminds the courtiers, was punishable by death in bygone times. Upon learning of what this errant knight has done, King Arthur is about to have him beheaded. Guinevere intervenes, saying that she will grant the knight his life if he can correctly answer a question Freud would pose centuries later. What does a woman want? The knight cannot answer, so the queen grants him some time to find an answer, a quest very different from that usually undertaken by romantic knights. When his time is nearly up, the knight chances upon an ugly old hag, who asks why he looks so forlorn. She assures him that she can give him the answer, but only if he will grant her any boon she may later demand. He assents, and she tells him to answer that a woman wants the same sovereignty over her husband as over her lover. She must master him, and he not be above her. a Fenimore way of saying women want to be in charge. This is the correct answer to the queen and her ladies, and the knight's life is spared. It would have been harder if they asked the knight to find the clitoris. Then the old hag demands her boon, and the knight marry her. Although he gave his word as a gentleman and she had just saved his life, he tries in a completely ungentlemanly way to weasel out of it. Nevertheless, eventually, he has to marry her. Escorted to their bedroom after the marriage service, he churlishly refuses her company and refuses to share her bed. A churl is low class, an earl is high class. She then makes him an offer. He can have her as an ugly, old, but faithful wife, or take his chances with her as a beautiful young wife, so beautiful that his friends will come to visit her rather than him. This last dilemma is too much for his knightly brain, and he gives up, saying that it's such a hard choice he will leave it up to her. Having got him to admit that she has sovereignty over him, she becomes beautiful and is also faithful ever after. Oh, well, that's just an out. That's just... Who wrote such a story? That's funny. Is that a movie? I feel like that's a movie. I feel like that's a movie with, isn't that the basis of Pretty Woman? I'm sorry, man. I'm tripping. Let me continue here. Anyway, thus using a covering of Fenimore language and a favorite Fenimore setting, Dame Alison, a dame only by courtesy, makes her points about class and marriage. Genteelness and courtesy, the supposedly defining traits of a Fenimore gentleman, have little to do with noble blood or wealth, and much to do with good deeds, rather than rape, with respect for others, even old hags, and with keeping one's word. And Dame Alison gives a fairy tale gloss to what most happily married men know, that they should love, honor, and at times even obey their wives. And thus Chaucer lectured the nobility through the words of a highly individual, intelligent, strong-willed middle-class woman, whose title, the Wife of Bath, is meant to imply a stereotype undercut by Chaucer's creativity and his none too highbrow views of gentillesse and marriage. William Shakespeare, born 1564, died 1616. William Shakespeare was writing and acting in his plays in the late Elizabethan and early Jacobean eras, around 1580 to 1610. He knew little Latin and less Greek, as his friend Ben Jonson, another playwright, wrote in his eulogy of Shakespeare. He attended only the town school in Stratford-upon-Avon and is thus unlikely to have been much influenced by Dante or even Chaucer, the English language having changed considerably. He would have grown up seeing passion plays and morality plays in Stratford. Mankind was written about 1475, around a century before Shakespeare's birth. But Coleridge's The Tide Terreth No Man was written when he was 11, 1576. Thus, the psychomachia of everyone's mind was still a strong element in Elizabethan folk psychology. Shakespeare's London theatre, the Globe, was open to all who could play. Shakespeare's London theatre, the Globe, was open to all who could pay. It was located in the suburbs, not then a good part of town, among the brothels, taverns, and bear-baiting rings. While patronized by the nobles and later by King James, Shakespeare wrote as much for the common people, the groundlings or understanders, who bought standing room only tickets and stood near the stage looking up, as he did for the aristocracy. His audience from all levels of society was familiar with morality plays. Othello, the Moor of Venice, performed first for King James in 1606, is one of his later tragedies, but it still shows that Shakespeare and his audience were well used to morality plays. In this play, a black general, Othello, is duped into believing that his chaste white wife, Desdemona, is cheating on him by a very vice-like character named Iago. In the first and third scenes of the first act, Iago drops many hints that he is a devil or vice. To Rodrigo and the audience, he says that if his speech and actions ever reflect his true intentions, 'Tis not long after, but I will wear my heart upon my sleeve. For daws to peek at, I am not what I am. Some 90 lines later, Iago says that he hates Othello as I do hell pains, which sounds like he has felt such pains. By scene 3 of Act 1, he is swearing to make trouble for Othello with his wits and all the tribe of hell, which sounds like he knows he can summon demons to his aid. Lines like these would certainly establish Iago as a vice or devil in the mind of Shakespeare's audience. Iago is, however, far more individually human-like than any previous vice, which is what makes this play still so popular around the world, when morality plays are staged only for historical reasons. Similarly, Desdemona is a believable individual woman, and Othello is a tragic hero who is easy to identify with. Their marital problems sound very modern. Desdemona is a virginal, young, urban, and white. He is a Moorish general, North African, strong but middle-aged, and used to life in rough military camps. There are certainly potential points of friction in this marriage. Desdemona has thrown away family, fortune, and hometown for Othello's sake, and might well in a few years come to regret her decision. Divorce was practically impossible then. He, however, has a besetting sin of jealousy, perhaps due to a sense of racial and social inferiority, but still a besetting sin. His lieutenant, Iago, encourages Othello's jealousy, using lying gossip to undermine Othello's faith in Desdemona. Iago all too easily convinces him that right after their wedding, Desdemona is having an affair with Cassio, one of Othello's officers, a Venetian gentleman whom she could have married without upsetting her family at all. This is patent nonsense, since she has just eloped with Othello. Some see Othello as very trusting and misled by lying evil. But how trusting is a man who immediately believes a lie about his bride and does not believe his bride's denial? Othello eventually kills Desdemona and, after Iago's wife reveals his lying tricks, kills himself. Suicide and murder are both deadly sins, so Othello is bound for hell, as surely as if devils came and hauled him through a hell's mouth, or a hell mouth. He dies without self-understanding, one who loved not wisely but too well, a man not easily jealous. He sees no more than did Francesca and Paolo, that he did not really love at all. Where they lusted in a mellow kind of way, he wanted to possess Desdemona as a prize to show off, not as an individual human being. Such is the nature of jealousy. He dies unrepentant, uncomprehending, in denial, we might say, and by the violence of his own hand. Thus the besetting sin of jealousy brings low a noble man, and an individualized psychomachia that still moves us today. There's a very good movie with Lawrence Fishburne playing Othello. That's so good. Acting, I watched it one time. We should watch it again and review it because it's that good. Othello is probably like my favorite Shakespeare play. I'm not going to lie and act like I've seen them all. I tried to watch the one Denzel did of Henry VIII. I think it's Henry VIII. Couldn't finish it. But yeah, definitely got to get some more into Shakespeare. Anyway, Miguel Cervantes, born 1547, died 1616. Wait, Cervantes lived in... Wow. Cervantes died the same year Shakespeare did. And they were kind of born close apart. Close. I mean, what is that, like a 15-year or almost 20-year age gap? But still, they died the same year. Talk about poetic irony. Anyway, Miguel Cervantes, born 1547, died 1616. Psychologically insightful literature did not develop only in England. Cervantes' Don Quixote, published in 1614, is arguably the first novel, the premier literary form in which personal character, personality, and consciousness are are artistically explored. Don Quixote de la Mancha is a poor Spanish knight. He has the right to bear arms, but is too poor to have good ones, and is too proud of his aristocratic heritage to work. He is one of those who have always a lance in the rack, an ancient shield, a lean hack, ill-fed horse, and a greyhound for coursing or hunting. With no warring wish to win glory, riches, and a wife, Don Quixote takes to reading romances, even selling off much of his land to buy more manuscripts. Finally, he becomes so addicted to these Fenimore soap operas that he reads day and night that he seems to go insane. And so, from little sleep and much reading, his brain dried up and he lost his wits. Go into the comments. Acty says, I love Othello. It's also my favorite, and I love that movie. That was such a good movie. Anyway, continuing here. Having gone romantically crazy, Don Quixote proceeds to hire a flea-ridden peasant, Sancho Panza, as his squire, and goes off on errantry, seeking fame, love, and adventure. He tilts at windmills, mistaking them for giants, and takes the tavern barmaid Dulcinea as his lady. Thus, out of delusions, he takes to treating common people nicely. Eventually, word of his mad escapades spreads, and a duke and duchess lay a trap for him for their aristocratic amusement. They find out where he is, bring him to their castle, and have the servants treat him as if he were indeed the star knight in an old romance. But is he really as mad as he first appears? Perhaps he is only making the best of his plight, being a knight in a time when there is no real use for knights. After a feast, they choose to question Don Quixote, rather mockingly, about his quest and the adventures of which they have heard so much. He claims to have found Dulcinea transformed into an unattractive country wench by a magic spell cast by one of the evil enchanters who envy and persecute him. These enchanters want to ruin him by depriving him of his lady, whom, more than anyone, he, a true knight, wants to impress by good service. This describes the ideal of fin amour. No adultery included the first step to parfait amour, perfect love, which leads to love of God. This ideal is far nobler than the way the nobles are treating a poor madman. Don Quixote's hosts go on to suggest that Dulcinea does not really exist, that he has never really seen her, that she is a fantastic mistress whom your worship engendered and bore in your mind. This is, of course, both true and false. There is a real Dulcinea back at the tavern, but her ladyship is indeed a product of Don Quixote's mind. To this suggestion, he gives the perfect Platonic answer, that Dulcinea is the form of the lady, ageless and perfect, the lady all true knights pursue. Such a lady would indeed be worthy of such a such a lady would indeed be worthy of such a gentleman's loving service. But of course, the well-bred nobles teasing him are right, and so is he. This is the ideal form of the lady, something that cannot exist on this mundane earth. Therefore, only a madman would bother to try to live up to such an exalted lady's standards. The high-born, well-bred nobles undercut his faith in good breeding, treating him so badly, but he does not notice. He is a highly eccentric individual, living as much as he can in the world of his own choosing, aided by his highly realistic peasant squire. And thus the silly courtly romances botched together shreds of paganism, which was reworked by clerics and troubadours to finally achieve a truly noble form with realistic characters. The Neoplatonic ideal in which the individual had no place finally created the idealistic individual. In the 18th century, the novel really arrived as a form of literature. Cervantes had claimed, tongue-in-cheek, to be telling a true tale of a real knight culled from old manuscripts. Similarly, Defoe got in legal trouble when Robinson Crusoe turned out not to exist. The first novel openly published as a work of fiction is Richardson's Pamela, the tale of a serving girl whose unseducible beauty finally wins her the hand of the squire who has been trying to seduce her. The subject matter is hardly novel, but the admission that these characters are realistic individuals who did not exist was indeed novel. At this point, the concept of the individual as we conceive it has certainly arrived. The Reformation. Although the Reformation had nothing directly to do with psychology, its general impact on European life and thought was profound, and its consequences affected psychological thinking in the 17th century. Christian religion in the Middle Ages was based upon performance of the Mass and upon a veritable industry of prayers. Salvation was gained by regular attendance of the Mass and by prayers, not only personal prayers, but prayers said for the souls of the dead. Critical to this latter practice was the medieval idea of purgatory, a place where the souls of sinners were sent to expiate their sins rather than face eternal damnation in hell. Thus it became possible for a dead person's relatives to do or purchase good works in aid of his or her release from purgatory. For example, wealthy Christians endowed chantries devoted to praying for the redemption of deceased relatives, and they could sometimes buy indulgences from the church to gain their relatives' immediate release from purgatory. As one Dominican friar put it, as soon as the coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs. The Reformation began in 1517 when Martin Luther, born 1483 and died in 1546, nailed his 95 Theses to the door of Wittenberg Cathedral, challenging the Catholic hierarchy. His central claim was that salvation came from faith and redemption from sin by the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, rather than the works of prayer or worse, the purchase of indulgences. Luther wanted a personal, intensely introspective religion, an Augustinian religion that de-emphasized ritual, priesthood, and hierarchy. Catholics responded with a counter-reformation that fought the Protestant rebellion, but that also incorporated Protestantism's new psychological inward searching for faith into its traditional emphasis on hierarchy and salvation by works. Both sides in this theological conflict also worked toward a reformation of manners, seeking to investigate and control personal behavior, especially sexual behavior, more rigorously than before. The Reformation and Counter-Reformation divided Europe politically, as provinces and nations identified with one cause or the other and fought to create and dominate a newly unified Christendom. While the fortunes of battle swayed sometimes in favor of the Protestants and sometimes in favor of the Catholics, neither side emerged victorious. From the perspective of the history of psychology, the important outcome of the Reformation was Christianity's new emphasis on the state of the soul. Protestants and Catholics alike began to look inside themselves for signs of grace. This introspective mood would provide René Descartes, modern psychology's founder, with his foundational philosophical method. Skepticism and its discontents. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in the pretty pace from day to day, to the last syllable of recorded time, and all our yesterdays have lighted fools. The way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale, told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Shakespeare from Macbeth. For all its creativity, the Renaissance was a time of tremendous social dislocation, misery, anxiety, and superstition. Lynn White has written that the Renaissance was the most psychically disturbed era in European history. I could agree. The 100 Years' War and later the 30 Years' War raged, bringing destruction to much of France and Germany, as mercenary armies alternately fought each other and pillaged the countryside when they were not paid. The Black Death that began in 1348 had by 1400 reduced the population of Europe by at least 1/3. Famines and various diseases struck year after year. The feudal order crumbled. Everyday life reflected the anxiety engendered by stress. Europe was obsessed with death. Picnics were held under the rotting corpses of the hanged. The image of the Grim Reaper was born. Scapegoats were sought. Mobs attacked Jews and witches. At a time when humanity was being glorified by the humanist, Human mortality and suffering were reaching new levels of bestiality, and the dark side of human nature was everywhere apparent. Intellectuals practiced the magical arts of occultism. The late 16th century was a time of doubt and skepticism. Ambiguity about humanity is found dramatically in William Shakespeare. The passage from Hamlet quoted at the start of the Renaissance section of this chapter sums up the optimistic humanist view of humans as noble, infinite, admirable, and godlike. Yet Hamlet goes on immediately to say, "And yet to me, what is this quintessence of dust? Man delights not me." The quotation from Macbeth at the beginning of this section is a powerful statement of disdain for humankind and life in the face of mortality, an almost existentialist expression of the seeming absurdity of life. Shakespeare's dramatic genius saw both the positive side of humans emphasized by the humanist and the negative side evident in history. A more philosophical thinker, Michel de Montaigne, born 1533 and died in 1592, also felt and articulated the limits of humanity. In stark contrast to the earlier humanist, Montaigne wrote, "Of all the creatures, man is the most miserable and frail, and therewithal the proudest and disdainfullest. The humanist made the human the paragon of animals with a unique and godlike intellect. Montaigne denied the uniqueness of humans. People are not the lords of creation. They are part of it. They are not the highest of animals. They are on par with them. Animals as well as humans have knowledge." Montaigne decried reason as a weak reed on which to base knowledge and argued instead for experience. But he then went on to show how deceptive and untrustworthy are the senses. In short, Montaigne toppled humans from the special place given them by medieval and Renaissance thinkers. Montaigne pointed to the future, to a skeptical and naturalistic theory of humanity and the universe. Montaigne was, in fact, denying the worldview that held sway in Europe from classical times, polished and refined in the Middle Ages and Renaissance. It was ultimately to be shattered and replaced by science and an increasingly secular philosophy. The world we have lost. The end of the pre-modern outlook. The world's a book in folio, printed all, with God's great works in letter capital. Each creature is a page, and each effect a fair character, void of all defects. Du Bartas from the Divine Works. The Divine Weeks. Sorry. Du Bartas said this poem, which is cute, in his book, The Divine Weeks. The Renaissance perfected a worldview implicit in classical culture and developed by the Middle Ages. Fundamental to this worldview was the idea that all things in the universe are linked in a grand order that we can decipher through resemblance. So, for example, Renaissance physicians thought skull and brain damage could be cured by the administration of walnuts, for the walnut shell resembled the skull and the nut resembles the brain. As the poet Du Bartas wrote, "The world is like a book, and any being is like a page, in that it bears signs that indicate its secret meaning to others with which it shares linkage. Nature is to be understood by deciphering these signs, not through experiment, but by close observation, seeking out similarities in relationships, a practice called hermeneutics." Hence, the medieval Renaissance scrutiny of the classic writers. Just as the world is a book revealing nature's symbolic order, so are books collections of words, signs that should reveal universal order. This order is not the scientific order of natural law, but an order built on sympathies and analogies between things. Sympathies and analogies signified by resemblance, as between walnut and brain, as in Neoplatonism. The human being occupied the central place in this orderly web of analogies. Annibale Romi's 17th century Courtier's Academy states, "The body of man is no other than a little model of the sensible world, and his soul an image of the world intelligible, Plato's world of the forms." The human body is a summary analogy of the physical world, and the mind is a summary analogy of the invisible world. The human is a microcosm reflecting the natural and supernatural macrocosm. The human is at the exact midpoint of the universe. The human body is worldly flesh, and the bodily passions tie humans to the animals. The human's rational soul is angelic, for angels are rational souls without bodies. In between, mediating between rational soul and worldly body, are human faculties, such as imagination and common sense. These faculties in the brain are subtle animal spirits, the purest of earthly substances, which link body and soul. This worldview was shattered in the 17th century and brushed away in the 18th. Montaigne pointed the way. The human is not the center of creation, but one animal among many. So also did Sir Francis Bacon. Nature is to be investigated by experiment and explained mechanistically. Soon, Galileo would show that the world is to be understood not by the decipherment of signs, as in language, but by the application of mathematics, which transcends particular observation. And that's all of chapter 4. We finished all of chapter 4, and that concludes part 2. We're going to continue tomorrow with part 3, Constructing the Modern World. That will be chapter 5, The Scientific Revolution. Let's just check real quickly how long that chapter is, The Scientific Revolution. I would like to know. Chapter 5 is about 30 pages or so. So we knocked off a short chapter. We'll probably chop off chapter 5 in 2 readings. But we're about midway or close to midway through this book. And so far it was interesting. I like that chapter of the pre-modern, right? Now we're building the modern world. Looking forward to this. Hopefully you enjoyed this reading. Hopefully you enjoyed this book. Hopefully you found something inspiring, educational, interesting in this text. I'm just doing a service for the people. That's all. I'm just here to help y'all learn. Y'all be easy out there and